Welcome back to the Flogsville podcast. It is the grand final edition plus prelim finals review show. Joining me, as always, is coach of the Rabbitohs. Hello, Daniel.
Hello, mate. Fantastic to be here. A few little technical gremlins beforehand, but nothing's going to get in the way of a grand final pod. So great to be here.
Absolutely, mate. Well, let's get straight into, wow, what a weekend it was. Quite a bizarre round, a high-scoring round, but just two really tight prelim finals, mate. And it was just the Burp and Burtons coming out on top over my boys. We'll get to that. And then the Liberatores, just too good, narrowly defeating Phenomenal. So I think it was, quite fitting that the two highest scores of those prelims got through. Brad and Hugh have been the benchmark really all year. A little bit of a dip in form for Hugh late, but he's bounced back nicely heading into the grand final. So congratulations to those guys. It's going to be very exciting because we're going to have a new winner, a first-time winner of the Flogsville comp. So super exciting, mate. Let's get into the first matchup, and it was my matchup with Brad. The Burp and Burtons. Quite a lot happened on the weekend. As we dive into it, of course, there was only 3 pods at the start of the weekend. That sort of changed things a little bit, but on my side, I certainly Brad just got the edge, but I felt like I beat myself really this week just with some of the trade outs I made. Unfortunately, Jack Steele and Tom Stewart going gangbusters. Just really unfortunate that, if I'd had held a Tom Stewart and then maybe trade Doc, another result would have come in. But quite happy with my trade-ins. Newman and Tom Green did their job, both 120. But it all came down to the VC, Rowan Marshall. I was cheering Rory Laird on late there. It looked like he needed about a 40-point quarter, I reckon, because Jack Steele was doing some good stuff late. Got a +4 added to his score as well, which hurt, but Rory Laird just didn't quite have enough there. So the deficit was 6. Heading into the Sunday, knowing that I'd have to captain Bont or English to try and beat that deficit. And I had English pretty much the whole Sunday morning, mates. And for some reason, I just thought I've started with Bont. I'm going to back him in. He needs 3 votes versus the Eagles. And unfortunately, he was there. He was 144 when I checked it. Didn't watch the first quarter and he was nowhere. First half, he was nowhere. Came out with 103-point second half. Just wasn't enough with a -4 from his score, 144. We joked about a draw, didn't we? That would have been a draw. So I think I would have progressed through on ladder position there. But the Bont, unfortunately, losing a tackle, kept me just short. So going down narrowly in the end, but well done to Brad.
Yeah, I think you've summarised it very well there, Scotty. And we said right from the start that these finals were going to be tight, particularly when there are only 3 pods in it. I think, clearly, if we look at your side as you've started with, those trades. Not often you bring in 2 blokes that get 120s and you're disappointed with your trades. It's just a matter of where things were at this week. And Tom Stewart, that game was a very interesting game. I'm not quite sure what Geelong were trying to do, to be honest. It wasn't working at all. They probably should have lost by 10 goals, really. But he was everywhere because they were just chipping it around and not taking any risks. So, that would have been alarm bells for your boys pretty quickly, the way that game was being played. And the captaincy, it's very, very fine margins. And on Brad's side, he's got a fantastic opportunity now in a grand final. He was, the highest scoring team of the round, only by 6 points. So it does shape up to be a very close grand final. But I'm sure we'll touch on it in a minute. It was very interesting this year that both the preliminary finals have been won by the teams who've gone the long way. Yourself and Fenno, unfortunately, just going down. So fantasy probably different to real footy, where it's not about being tight or whatever. It's actually about getting your team going well and getting momentum with those players, and those two have been able to cash in.
Absolutely, and I think we've all had forced trades and we've all had underperforming players that we've wanted to get rid of. So I think the week off, certainly from my perspective, I still, I upgraded sort of sideways trade two guys. Like I didn't really ever think about a double downgrade or cashing up. Like I had issues to deal with and spuds to get rid of, really. Yeah, just Tom Stewart. That's the one that hurts. Like I sort of thought Doherty, if Doherty was named out, and we'll get to him tonight, unfortunately, he's named out, but Doherty being named was a bit of the killer. I was sort of hoping he would. Doherty to Newman made sense for me, and then I would have to decide, a Steele or a Crouch or Stewart. I just thought Ross Lyon, they said they'd put some time into him. I just thought he would maybe not have a ceiling score, and that didn't turn out the way it was. But congrats to Brad. We'll get through to the next matchup, mate. Let's have a look for the Liberatores getting the job done over Phenomenal. This was quite a tight matchup with a couple of players on Hughes' side not quite doing enough. You would say Zeeble in his retirement game was a little bit underperforming. But the big one there is Jaden Short. I watched a fair bit of that game on Saturday, and the opportunity was there for him, but he just didn't show that hunger, that thirst for the pill. Went with emotions there. That could have, that's really cost Tom, I think, that those 20 odd points there. What else did you see from this matchup, mate?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. A couple more pods than the previous matchup, but I think Caleb Sarong is a name that really stands out in that matchup as well. He's been in huge form. I think his coach, Justin Longmire, has said he should be a lock for the All-Australian team. So that's a big statement, but he has had a very good year. And his 86 is a fair difference when you go smack bang across the other side and you see Andy Brayshaw with 119 in the same match. I think on Hughes' side, a lot of it was probably going to hinge on Caleb Daniel and Jack Zeeble. And I think you nailed it, Scotty, that whilst Zeeble didn't, there was a potential. I just had a feeling Zeeble was going to go 150 this week, in a retirement game. Unfortunately, he had a pretty okay afternoon and a very average evening, which is a separate story.
Yeah.
But those two were just solid enough for Hugh. I think Caleb Daniel would have been a concern, given that he has pumped out some 30s, even in recent weeks. And James Sicily, really, from an upside for Hugh, like Sicily, massively underperforming compared to what he can. So, yeah, not a lot in this matchup at all. English as the captain for Tom just edged the captaincy his way a little bit, but it wasn't enough to make up that sort of 20 points that he needed to get over the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this matchup, just looking at it on paper, like it's a bit of a head scratcher, I suppose. George Hewitt was fantastic for Tom. A good trade in for him. I know he was cash strapped, as we mentioned last week, and too right there with Sarong. Yeah, Port putting a bit of time into him compared to Brayshaw, and we'll get to that this week up against Finn McGuinness and the Hawks. What happens there? But yeah, just exciting for Hugh. Unfortunate for Tom. He sort of after the buys, he was really put a good run together. It was one of those form sides, but just couldn't quite go through to the GF this year, but a great season from him. And let's move on. We'll just briefly touch on the secondary finals. Big upset. The B-Sharps with a thumping score, a 25-67, knocking out Hoffleberry FC. And then Total Eclipse of the Heart, easy result against the Keys. We'll talk more about that in a moment, the grand final, how that's shaping up. But let's preview this grand final, and I've got some coaches' statements, Rabs. I've asked the boys to give me something, give me a little bit of a media statement. So I'm going to read through those first. We'll start with Brad, and then we might talk about Brad's team, and then I'll read Hugh's statement out. Then we might talk about Hugh's team, and then we'll put it all together. How does that sound?
Sounds fantastic, mate.
All right, let's go with Brad. Here we go. So as coach of the Burp and Burton franchise, I would like to express the sense of pride currently felt upon earning our first ever Flogsville Grand Final appearance. Not only that alone, but doing so without the assistance of an assistant coach, in brackets, regrettably, only adds to the satisfaction. What a year it's been. The team has shaped up nicely over the course and avoided some carnage in the early stages. Bad luck caught up, and a few late season losses brought a reality check for the Burpins. However, a win under our belt in round 17 against the Liberatores. Spirits are high around the club. A close win under pressure against stiff opposition in the prelim has also filled the lads with confidence. Unfortunately, a couple of trades in hand. Two of our soldiers will not play this weekend. The Magnets have been flying all over the board so far this week as we prepare for anything come team selection on Thursday night, which we'll get into. The inconsistency of some over the last few has not gone unnoticed. However, no one is safe come lockout. No more bullshit. It comes down to this. Do or die. See you on the other side. Coach Burt. There you go.
Strong words, be fair to say. I do rate that. If that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. That's very good from Brad.
Very good. No, I'm messaging a fair bit with our prelim and the circus that was. He's pumped, which is great to see. And the Flogsville favourite, Brad, and we love how he goes about it. Let's talk about his team because it is about the pods, and we'll get to those. But in terms of Will Day's been ticked to play, a bit of cramp. There was a bit of a concern about an injury there. And then it is Sam Doherty for both of these teams already. So let's have a look at Brad's side, mate. Is there anyone else you might see he might be looking to trade out alongside Doherty?
Well, I'm sure he's going to make two trades, so he's definitely going to have to weigh up where he thinks his best option is. I think an obvious, I know we're talking about Brad, but an obvious difference between the two sides is that Hugh really has his two trades forced from the fact that he's got Jack Siebel as well, where Brad does have that luxury of making that trade. But I hate to bring it up, Scotty, but your team was probably a prime example last week where that can almost be a poison chalice to some degree, where you don't actually want to have to try and pick and choose who are the guys who are going to perform and who's going to underperform. So it's going to be a real tough one for Brad this week because he's going to have to line up his matchups. He's got good players everywhere, really. So there's no one for me that stands out as a real obvious one. I don't know what your thoughts are, but he's really going to have to weigh up all the matchups and have a look at it. But yeah, the pods that he does have at the moment, I think there's some real strengths to all of them. Josh Dunkley was able to bounce back quite well last week. Jack Steele looked like he was at his best. He does have a tough matchup this week against the Lions at the Gabba. And that might be something to consider because 3 of Brad's pods out of his 5 are all playing in the same matchup, which is interesting. That can work to your favour depending on the nature of the game. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And Cornelio sort of up and down a little bit, but and Luke Jackson's been pretty solid of late with his role. So not a lot that can go massively wrong there for Brad. But as I said, that is tough because he's got to work out who's going to be that second trade for him.
Absolutely, mate. Well analysed. Yeah, that Saints Brisbane game. There's a little bit on it, more so for Brisbane, I would say. The Saints are locked in. So I think, Dunkley and Neale will be interesting. At the Gabba, I think suits them. Jack Steele, as you mentioned, back in some form. I think Cogs will be fine on that Sunday, that last game. So we'll have to see how many he needs, which will be interesting to see. And Luke Jackson, he was a bit disappointing against Port. Like, he had an 80-odd. Probably not what Brad wanted, but he could be one he could move. But maybe an Andrew Brayshaw. Depends if Finn McGuinness goes to Sarong or him, potentially. Someone like Will Day, you could maybe move. I'm just having a look through some others. Tim Taranto's been a little bit concerned of late, but you'd have to back him in, I think, even though he's playing Port on Sunday. So, yeah, some interesting decisions ahead for Brad. But let's talk about Hugh. I've got his statement here, so I'll read that out as well, and then we'll dive into his side. Okay, here we go. So, very privileged to play in our first Flogsville Grand Final. It's been a long journey to get here, and we've seen continuous improvement from when we joined the league. This is true. This is only our second finals appearance, so it's been a battle to get here, and we feel like we deserve to be here after the year that we've had. Looking ahead to the matchup, it makes sense for Brad to be there. The 2 top scoring teams all year meeting in the GF has a good feel about it. He's been consistent this year as always. There was only a handful of times this year where both of us weren't in the top 2 on the ladder. Great point. It has to be said, though, that Brad's team has been a fair bit more settled than mine post-buys. Looking back at week 17, I traded in Helmet and Callum fucking Mills, a favourite, for a combined 120, and I've had to play a bit of catch up, which has left me with a lot of forced trades each week. And even this week, my trades have to move on. Zeeble, he says he wants to move on CD, but unfortunately, Sam Doherty is going to be that guy. So he's have to back in CD up against the Cats. Took a bit of a risk last week, leaving a bit of bank so I could move on the line. So that's good. He's got some money in the bank. With Brad having more of a settled team, he has the flexibility of moving on anyone, which is always a tough decision that can go often against you, as we saw last week with me. I would expect him to potentially move on someone like a Lockie Neal. Okay, Doherty, well, that's going to happen. Or even a Taranto against Port. There we go. Similar thinking. He could even flick Brayshaw with a tag threat. Oh, again, Hugh, you're talking my language. So there's a lot of things to weigh up for Brad. Good luck to him, and I hope he makes a good move. I just hope my moves work better. After my trade plans currently on my screen, there are only 4 pods, with the last 3 game averaging, giving me a 20-30 point advantage. So it should be a close matchup, and I hope it is. I said to Tara, his assistant coach, earlier in the week that I have to watch every game or not one this weekend. So we'll see how the nerves go. So it might be a weekend for plenty of distraction. Good luck to Brad, and may the best team win. It very well might come down to the last 2 games on Sunday. So if we can, if I can get out of parenting duty, we might have to organise a trip to the pub and see it play out. Doherty out changes things. ... So there you go, mate.
Big statement. I did love just floating a little bit of mind games there for me from Hugh, just throwing some potential trades out there for Brad, just to get him pondering, which I do like, just to try and get in the head of the opposition, which is good. So, yeah, I think Hugh sort of nailed it there in his own statement, as he would, because it's his team. But I think, you look at his team and I think it is quite obvious that he's had those challenges in the second half of the year with the trades. I think the reason he's here in the grand final was because he was clearly the best team for the first half of the year, and that strength has been able to carry his side through it. I think his trades are easy to see. It's more a matter of where he's going to go with them, and I think the fact that he's got a little bit of cash to play with is definitely going to go to his advantage. But it's going to be a tight matchup. He's saying there might be 4 pods at the moment. There's 5 listed, which is interesting as well. That probably gives us an indication about where he might be going with one of those.
Yeah.
But time will tell. I really do feel like there's going to be some key matchups in this round, and I must admit, I feel like the Brisbane St Kilda match is probably going to be really critical. And I think, to your point, Scotty, it shapes as an interesting match because it's very important for Brisbane. As a St Kilda supporter, it's interesting because for me, it is important for St Kilda. They win that game, they're guaranteed a home elimination final, quite possibly against Sydney, which could end up being at Marvel.
Yeah.
So for me, it is important. Having said that, they've rested Max King, which tells you a little bit about how they rate it. So I think there's going to be some interesting matchups, and there's some weird stuff that always happens in round 23 and this year in round 24. So hard to predict, but I don't know. We're going to jump into predictions now. Is that where we're going?
Yeah, let's do it. I just might want to. I might have a look at some of his pods. And just looking at Hugh's team, he's got some flexibility there with the DPP, with the Jack Zeeble, Sam Doherty. He's got Sam Flanders in his midfield too. So it's not a case of he'll have to bring in a defender for Doherty. He'll be able to flick around those moves. So he can bring in a midfielder for Zeeble, Chuck Flanders in the forward line. So he's got some options. I love Sam Flanders against North Melbourne. In my team, I'm definitely looking at bringing him in this week. CD is the tough one. Like, if it's going to be a tight matchup, I think the helmet is going to have a lot to say of this result, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Rory Laird against a nothing game against West Coast as well. Could be anything. He's been in some good form. And then Petrarca, his role on the weekend, just very forward against Hawthorn, didn't score well. So he is a concern, where on Brad's side, I think you've got, that key game, the Brisbane St Kilda. We'll wait and see. And then the moves he makes, whether he does move a Luke Jackson or he tries to move a Brayshaw, and then that becomes a pod in his favour. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating, mate. Captaincy choice too, because The Bulldogs Geelong game, maybe a Tim English, a Bont. However, that's pretty much on at the same time as the Crows West Coast. So if you were looking at a Jordan Dawson, Rory Laird, you can't really do that. So you've got to pick one of those guys, which is unfortunate because the games before, I can't really see anyone really putting their hand up for the VC. Rowan Marshall maybe, but there's that risk that, Ross Lyon might sub him off just to rest him up for finals. What are you sort of thinking with the captaincy choice, mate?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what you're saying. There's definitely a bit of a cluster where the main captaincy sort of options are all playing at a similar time. I'm going to go totally left field for the VC, and I think you've actually name dropped this player, but Sam Flanders against North Melbourne, I just think you'd have to consider it. When you look at the other matchups that are around there, I mean, Essendon Collingwood is giving you bugger all now that Nick Dacos is not playing. Hawthorn, Fremantle, as we've sort of noted, all the key movers for Freo. There's that McGuinness factor. Brisbane, St Kilda, I'd be really nervous about going to anyone in that, for similar reasons, to be honest. It's hard to predict what's going to go on in that game and how seriously both teams are going to take it, especially if it starts going one way. So, it's tough. Though, Geelong Geelong Dogs and West Coast Crows, there is a slight difference in time, though. So, you could potentially roll the dice on a Tim English or a Bont, and then bank on it in the first quarter. And I would not be surprised. In fact, I'd almost bank. I think one of the coaches will do that. Just given that the best option. I mean, there's some great options in that Dogs Cats game with the Bont and Tim English right at the front of that. So, very, very interesting to see how they go. And as always, highly likely to play a key role in the end result.
No, spot on, mate. I rate that VC, Sam Flanders. He's been in unbelievable form against North Melbourne. I think certainly that's what I sort of look at is those nothing games, the games that mean nothing. Often we see in the last round some serious ceiling scores. So, your North Melbourne up against the Gold Coast. We've got the Crows against West Coast. I think there's just going to be points aplenty around there. And the Sunday game too, I don't mind a Connor Rozee or a Butters, probably Butters more so against the Tigers at home. Should be very good. And then maybe Errol, I don't know, versus Melbourne. It's a bit of a smoky there, but certainly wouldn't be touching Brayshaw for a VC or Sicily. Would not be going there. I love Jack Sinclair as a player, but probably he'd be a left field one as well up at the Gabba. Tom Stewart against the Bulldogs. Again, it's that same game. We saw what he did last week. So, I think the Bont or English definitely, and then have a look at how they're going and then make that switch to, a Dawson or a Laird could be the play. So, it's stressful times for both boys. It's a tough time of year to make those decisions because, they're so, as we saw last week, it's such fine margins. Like, you just can't predict sometimes what's going to happen. So we wish the very best of luck to both of them. Been the standout teams all year and they deserve to be here fighting out for the Flogsville trophy, which is just in the spare room, but it's exciting to get that engraved with a new name. So let's briefly talk about the secondary final. The B Sharps have really turned it around up against Total Eclipse of the Heart, who finished 10th, had a better year than last year, that's for sure, and are carrying some momentum. What do you see with this matchup, mate? Very quick.
I think the B Sharps are going to win. Interesting to note that they were the highest scoring team out of the ones that were playing. We don't know what other people did, but 25-60 for the B Sharps last week. Massive score. And having done no research at all, the main reason, Doc as a pod and LDU as a pod for the Total Eclipse of the Heart. I think that's big trouble. You'd have to back the B Sharps in, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we might leave it there. We usually don't really do a grand final review show, so I don't know if we will next week, but we'll let you know anyway. We've got the AFLW Fantasy. I'll get an open league. We won't do a head-to-head league. We'll just do an open league just to see how many points, if people are interested in playing. That starts next weekend, so get your AFLW Fantasy team underway as well. That's been it, mate. Thank you for your contributions this season. It's been a pleasure.
Nah, thank you very much, mate, and thank you for your work as the in the host chair. Done a fantastic job, and yeah, good luck to all our coaches, all two of them, in the main grand final this weekend.
Oh, absolutely. That's it. What are your trades, mate? What are you thinking at the moment? Might as well. Let's.
Nah, just about deleted the app, mate. I'm out of every comp. Went out in
Yeah,
straight sets actually in another comp. So yeah, nah, no trades happening
no
on my
trade.
desk. What about you, mate?
What about me? Well, I think, Doc, I haven't got that DPP flexibility. So I think I'm going to bring back the Shees. I think I'm going to bring him back against the Gold Coast. No Zeeble. Should be a bit of ball down there for him. And then I'm probably going to move on Luke Jackson and go to that man, Ned Flanders. So I think they're going to be my moves.
Very nice. Well, we've spoken about Sam Flanders' work. So yeah, very, very logical trading, I think.
Yeah. All right, guys. Best of luck to everyone. Brad and Hugh, go well, guys. And we might be here next week. We might not. We'll see how it goes. But there, yeah, that's it. See you next time.